Good evening, welcome to This Week in Turkey. Regional diplomacy continues in full force as the referendum on the independence of the Iraqi Kurdish region approaches.
The regional actors have intensified the pace of their diplomatic traffic with the Kurdish regional government while approaching the referendum on independence of the Iraqi Kurdistan region. The referendum is scheduled to be held on September 25th. Following his meetings with the Baghdad government on Monday, the Kurdish regional government president Mesut Barzani told the journalists that the independence referendum is already being held at a late date, therefore it cannot be postponed under the current circumstances. In a response to a question, Barzani pointed out that as trust no longer exists between Erbil and Baghdad, the only way Kurdish regional government could agree to postpone the vote is if there are better alternatives and better guarantees. A day later, during his meeting with U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis, Barzani also noted that the referendum is a right of the people of Kurdistan according to the principles of democracy and human rights, Burada reported. Meanwhile, Mattis reiterated Washington's concern that the referendum could destabilize the region and negatively affect the campaign against ISIS. A day later, the Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu made a series of official visits to Baghdad and Erbil, both in the joint conference with the Iraqi counterpart Ibrahim el-Jaferi, and during his meeting with Barzani, Minister Çavuşoğlu stated that Ankara expects the Iraqi Kurdistan regional government to cancel the referendum. Our expectation from Erbil is absolutely plain and clear. It is the cancellation of this referendum decision, Çavuşoğlu said, stressing the importance of the stability, unity and solidarity of the region. Yet, a senior Iraqi Kurdish official told El Monitor that Minister Çavuşoğlu made no suggestion at all of sealing the border, revisiting trade or suspending money transfers to Erbil if Kurdish regional government proceeded with the referendum. Meanwhile, Turkey has also pursuing an intense diplomacy regarding the situation in Syria. A week after Iranian Chief of Staff Mohammad Bagheri's visit to Turkey, U.S. Secretary of Defense Mattis came to Ankara. Mattis gave us assurances that the U.S. gave great importance to the NATO alliance binding us together. He stressed that their alliance with the YPG, which he described as temporary, was limited to the fight against ISIS, a Turkish source told Hürriyet Daily. The US cooperation with YPG, along with the situation in Rojava and Idlib, has been at the top of Turkey's agenda during the meetings. Commenting on the developments in Syria, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated, "We expect a fourth de-escalation zone to be established in Idlib following the ones in Syria's west, eastern Ghouta and Homs as a result of the negotiations among Turkey, Russia and Iran."
Joining us from London, United Kingdom tonight is Güney Yıldız, who is a Syria specialist at the European Council of Foreign Relations. Good evening, Mr. Yıldız.
Good evening.
So as you know, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu made a series of official visits to Baghdad and Erbil recently, and during this visit he said, I quote, "Our expectation from Erbil is absolutely plain and clear. It's the cancellation of this referendum decision." So first of all, how realistic do you think is this call, and what can you tell us about the meaning of these remarks by Çavuşoğlu?
I think we should also remember that this discussion about the Iraqi Kurdish referendum hasn't started in the last couple of weeks. I mean, President of Iraqi Kurdistan, Mesut Barzani, paid visits to European capitals, and has meetings with U.S. officials, and also paid visits to Ankara twice. And after his second visit, which was earlier this year, the message they received, or they interpreted the message they received from the Turkish government as being not too hard on Iraqi Kurdish referendum. So when I spoke to KRG officials, when they declared the date for the referendum, how they see how Turkey will react to this, they were saying that Turkey has generally been more positive than negative, and their responses are muted compared to other forces. But in my discussions, I and there's reason for this. Like President Erdogan enjoys political support from the Kurdistan Democratic Party leader Mesut Barzani in Turkey. Also, there is a high volume of oil trade and other energy and trade relations between KRG and Turkey. But this position, AK Party's and President Erdogan's position had to change, mostly because of regional dynamics and also the internal Turkish state fragmentation in of different political groups inside the Turkish state, I would guess. So gradually we've seen Turkish position vis-a-vis Iraqi Kurdish referendum becoming more and more hardline. Mm-hmm. So the initial statement by Çavuşoğlu, Turkish Foreign Ministry of President Erdogan, was that this is an irresponsible decision. It wasn't like we are fully against this decision. But after another level of rapprochement with Iran and a broader lack of consensus in the Turkish establishment, broader than AK Party, I think it pushed the government to change its line. I think the thinking inside the Turkish establishment is that we have good relations with Mesut Barzani at this moment, and he's against the PKK as much as we are. So it's an asset in terms of security dynamics. But what will happen if we give a green light to Iraqi Kurdish independence, and 5 years from now, and kind of an independent Kurdistan could be led by another political group which is closer to PKK than President Barzani? I think the thinking behind in the Turkish establishment is a bit longer term, and we also in order to put it into context, we need to remember Turkey KRG relations, or relations with both Mesut Barzani and Jalal Talabani, started as a military relationship in 1991. When Turkish Chief of General Staff initiated the first talks with Barzani and Talabani and enlisted their support against the PKK in 1992. And they dealt together, Turkish Army, the PUK and KDP forces dealt the heaviest blow against the PKK in 1992. And ever since, the relationship between Turkey and these two political groups remained firstly as a military relationship. So the Turkish military was thinking of both dividing the Kurdish political spectrum and also enlisting support from KDP and PUK against the PKK. So if the security dynamic changes, Turkish state will react. And I don't necessarily rule out that the referendum can be cancelled or can be delayed. It will obviously be a huge political blow against the President Barzani. But in order to save maybe face, some other measures can be implemented. Like, it won't be necessarily President Barzani's decision, but other political parties can intervene, and maybe they can take a kind of a collective decision. But it is not, we cannot rule out the possibility of postponement of the referendum. And also, for an Iraqi Kurdish state which is landlocked, in order to survive, it needs the full backing of at least a regional or an international force. And at the moment, we know, it's clear how Turkish state is against, how Iran is against, most important two neighbors, and Iraqi central government is against this. The only regional country probably is in favor of Kurdish independence is probably Israel. And neither US nor European Union have any appetite to support an independent Kurdistan against the wishes of both Turkey and both Ankara and Tehran.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Yıldız, it's known that the US and other Western countries are worried, actually, that September's referendum in Iraqi Kurdistan may ignite a new conflict in the region and therefore divert attention from the war against the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. So my question to you is, in a scenario as such, how do you think Turkey's position would be?
As I tried to say, both European Union and United States, there's almost no appetite to support Iraqi Kurdistan's independence bid, but there is a huge appetite to support Iraqi Kurdistan as it is. Like, the German government is providing weapons and training to Iraqi Kurdistan. United States is building which will be world's largest consulate building in Erbil. So we see a lot of political support to Iraqi Kurdistan as it is. but bringing in these political forces are not ready for a change in the borders of the region. This is despite the fact that the KRG is seen as one of the closest partners. For example, some European states have better relations with KRG or more intense relations with KRG than the Iraqi central government. And was your question was also about how would Turkey react in this?
What kind of a position would Turkey hold in that kind of a scenario?
I think initially, like when the declaration was made that there would be an independence referendum, many countries kind of tested each other. Probably Iran waited Turkey to step into become the main power against independence, and Turkey wanted Iran to do Turkey's business of preventing Kurdish independence. But gradually, I think when a German foreign minister, for example, was one of the first actually statements which was firmly against Iraqi Kurdish independence, and then we've seen visits to and from Tehran, which also pushed President Barzani to postpone the election. But the Turkish position is even harder than that, which is asking for a cancellation of a referendum. I think this is also obviously a big obstacle for Iraqi Kurdish independence, but it's also potentially harmful for Turkey as well, because when we look at the regional map, we see Iran have almost full control over Iraq now. Like Iranian forces are inside from Mosul to Tel Afar to other places, and they have really good relations with the Iraqi central government. Lots of different assets, lots of Shia parties supporting Iran's position. And the last thing they would want to see is and Iraq, which they have huge influence on, is to be divided, Kurdistan separated from there. But when we look at the Turkey's position towards Iraq, we see Turkey not getting on well at all with the Iraqi central government, Shia-dominated government. And Turkey cannot continue supporting pro-Sunni groups in different areas because they don't have enough assets on the ground. And on the other hand, they have good relations with the KDP, and KDP is necessary politically, but also militarily to stop the advance of the PKK. That's from the Turkish government point of view. But Iran has better relations with PUK. So Turkey is actually, by doing this, alienating the best or closest ally it has on the ground, which is the Kurdistan Democratic Party, which is a pro-independence political party. Other political parties, including the PUK, Goran movement, and parties linked to the groups linked to PKK or other movements, are not necessarily as favorable to an independence referendum at this point in time. They have other pressing means. So Turkey is allied with the pro-independence group in the region, and it's against independence. So on one hand, it needs to lend support to President Barzani in order to stop advance of the PKK, but it is also against the independence. So it is in that sense harming Barzani, and President Barzani or his KDP party needs support because that's actually, it's not on, as new areas joined Peshmerga-controlled areas, like including Kirkuk and other areas, these areas are mostly not necessarily pro-Barzani areas. And also we know that the PKK is gaining more and more legitimacy and support from the public inside Iraqi Kurdistan. So, the Turkey needs to formulate its policy in a bit to still continue rivaling Iran in the region, to have some influence in Iraq, also to counter the PKK's advance, and going against President Barzani on independence is not necessarily helping Turkey's position.
Mm-hmm. You've made references to the role and influence of Iran in this equation a few times in your responses, and that brings us to my final question to you. As you may have also followed very closely, Iran's military chief Bagheri made a rare visit to Ankara to hold talks on Syria. And although we don't know the actual content of these talks, it's been revealed that the two countries agreed to cooperate on the fields of intelligence and counterterrorism. So can we interpret this decision as a joint move against the Kurds? And if so, would this have consequences for Iraqi Kurds as well prior to this referendum?
I think from the Turkish side, the main, it's a double issue. The first priority is obviously the PKK, and we've seen in pro-government press that claims about Turkey and Iran agreeing on a joint operation against the PKK headquarters in Kandil Mountains. But then it was denied from the Iranian side, and also today by Prime Minister Yıldız as well. And one thing we can say about those reports is that if it was a serious possibility that a military operation could take place against the PKK or launched by Iran, the first thing the authorities would do is to try to hide it, not to publish reports of detailed reports of how such an attack could take place against Iran. So I don't necessarily think that Turkish-Iranian cooperation against Iraqi Kurdistan broadly or the PKK would be very successful, because if you look at in recent history, in 2011 and 12, Turkey had a very close relationship with the Iranian government and mediating in the nuclear talks and trying to help Iran to bypass sanctions at that time. And even at that time, the military cooperation or intelligence cooperations against the PKK wasn't at its height. So when Turkey's anti-Kurdish politics or Turkey's anti-independence politics or anti-PKK politics do not necessarily overlap with Iran's. What happened in 2011-12? Turkey pursued a further confrontation with the PKK. But what Iran did is to declare a kind of a mutual ceasefire between the Iranian wing of the PKK, Party of Freedom, Free Life of Kurdistan, at that time, and also kind of neutralizing the violent threat from the PKK. Iran managed to focus more of its forces in Syria, and also, in a way, was able to position or help Kurds position themselves against Turkey more than Iran. But Turkey, by directly confronting the PKK and also firmly putting all their bets in KDP rather than the broader Iraqi Kurdistan, I think wasn't as successful as Iran in the Syrian theater, Syrian conflict, and in Iraq as well. So I don't see much reason to say Turkish-Iranian cooperation against PKK would be successful, and even there is full cooperation between Turkey and Iran. A successful operation against the PKK fighters in Iraqi Kurdistan or Kandil Mountains would take at least years. I mean, we can see this from what's happening on the ground in Turkey, like the PKK can still operate inside Turkey, let alone in their, they will be able to continue operate in their headquarters, which they've, located since early 1980s. But this cooperation would work against Iraqi Kurdistan independence bid, and I think in this regard, Iran is more coming out more. Benefiting more of this cooperation than Turkey, because Iran is more against Iraqi Kurdish independence than Turkey, because they're controlling Iraq as it is, and they wouldn't want a group to split away from Iraq. But whereas Turkey has only good relations only with the President Barzani's party, KTP.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Yıldız, thank you very much for your comments and for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Iran's Chief of General Staff, Major Mohammad Bagheri, traveled to Ankara on Wednesday in a rare visit to hold talks on Syria.
It was presented as a visit to foster cooperation between Turkey and Iran on the areas of intelligence, counter-terrorism, and joint policies against regional threats. But this visit was not preceded by any serious public diplomacy. Both in Turkey and Iran, the visit was talked about more after it happened, yet we still know very little about its content. In a way, we have received a lot of tabloid-like information on the visit, such as information on the delegation members and their qualities, or which of these members were traveling abroad for the first time. We concentrated more on the topics that made this visit noteworthy, but this visit also bears importance on the future of Turkey-Iran relations. It's not important only in terms of Iran's relations with Turkey, but also in terms of Turkey's regional policy, its presence in Syria and Iraq, the PKK and the Kurdish question. That is why this visit involved actors who signaled that what would be discussed would go beyond symbolic meanings and cover more concrete topics.
German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel called on Berlin and the rest of Europe to support the democratically minded majority of Turks who do not back Erdogan, following a recent row with the Turkish president.
Last Friday, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called on Turks in Germany not to vote for the enemies of Turkey in the upcoming general elections on September 24th. Erdogan said, "Don't support the Christian Democrats, the Social Democrats or the Greens. They are all the enemies of Turkey." Erdogan's remarks triggered a new row amid ongoing disputes between Germany and Turkey. German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel responded to Erdogan on the same day, saying that Erdogan's statement was an example of interference into German politics which they had never seen. On Saturday, Erdogan targeted Gabriel personally and said, "Now they have a foreign minister who doesn't know his limits. Who are you to talk to the president of Turkey? Talk to the foreign minister of Turkey. Know your limits. He is trying to teach us a lesson. What is your background in politics? How old are you?" Erdogan repeated his call on Turkish citizens in Germany to cast their votes to parties that don't show enmity against Turkey. German Foreign Minister Gabriel said on August 21st that Berlin and the rest of Europe should support the democratically minded majority of Turks who do not back Erdogan. He also accused supporters of the Turkish president of threatening his wife, saying the personal nature of Erdogan's attacks on him had emboldened people to make threats against his wife. Gabriel also said on August 24th that in this state it's clear that Turkey will never become a member of the EU. "It's not because we don't want them, but because the Turkish government and Erdogan are moving fast away from everything that Europe stands for," he added. German Chancellor Angela Merkel stated that Erdogan's remarks on Gabriel and on German politics are absolutely unacceptable. Moreover, Spanish police detained German-Turkish Doğan Akanlı on August 19th while he was on holiday in Spanish city of Granada over Ankara's request after issuing an Interpol warrant. After his detention, German Foreign Minister Gabriel called his Spanish counterpart and urged him to not extradite Akanlı to Turkey. Chancellor Merkel also accused Turkey of misusing Interpol and certain similar international organizations. European Commissioner for Enlargement Johannes Hahn said in an interview that the detention of Akanlı was unacceptable. Akanlı was conditionally released by a Spanish court on Sunday. He is not allowed to leave Spain until the Spanish court releases the final decision. Turkey is obliged to submit a formal extradition request to the Spanish authorities in 40 days. Akanlı was arrested in 2010 on his arrival at an Istanbul airport for alleged implication in an armed robbery in 1989. He was released 4 months later and then declared innocent before a court of appeal ordered new proceedings against him. Turkish authorities claim that Akanlı was a member of the now disbanded People's Liberation Party Front of Turkey.
In a meeting with his party's provincial heads in Istanbul, AKP's chairman and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan warned his party for the 2019 elections and said, "If we fail Istanbul, we will fall in Turkey."
The chairman of the ruling AKP continues to warn his party on its way to the 2019 elections. On Monday, in a meeting with AKP's Istanbul provincial heads, it is crucial to raise the ruling AKP votes in Istanbul above Turkey's average to win the upcoming elections, Erdogan said, urging his party to double efforts when campaigning. It is a must for us to raise our votes in Istanbul above Turkey's average with our campaigns until the 2019 elections. In the referendum, we received 48.65% of the votes. We do not want to see Istanbul like that. The moment that Istanbul falls behind the average, we will be very disappointed, he said. Erdogan's words come amid the AKP's preparations for campaigns for the upcoming presidential and parliamentary elections. In his remarks on the upcoming elections, Erdogan's stress was on Istanbul. If we fail in Istanbul, we will fall in Turkey. If we move a little in Istanbul, we will run in Turkey, he said. On the other hand, Erdogan continued to demand a renewal operation in the AKP ahead of the elections. We will never allow the weaknesses of old political parties to affect the AKP, he said. We need leaders who are fair and who will not allow any corruption. The municipalities will not be drifted away with corruption. We have to be determined about that, he added. Another important remark Erdogan made was his slam on some columnists and social media figures for speaking on his behalf. In the debates that are usually triggered by some social media accounts or by some columnists, some are responding strongly on my behalf. I am expressing from here loud and clear if I have an opinion, suggestion, or a feeling that I want to share with my nation or my party. The ways are clear. I don't need anybody to react on behalf of me. I would react if necessary, Erdogan said. Apart from me and my spokesperson, none of the statements have any relation to me or my party, he also added.
Former MHP deputy Meral Akşener has announced that preparations for a new party are underway.
Meral Akşener, a former MHP deputy, announced that she has started preparations for the establishment of a new party. Akşener will officially announce the founding of the new party in Samsun on October 29th, the Republic Day. The party, whose name still remains unknown, will participate in the presidential and parliamentary elections that will take place in 2019 as an opponent of the ruling AKP and President Erdogan. Akşener and other dissident MHP members were dismissed from the party after their attempt to hold an extraordinary congress in 2016 to defeat MHP's current chair, Devlet Bahçeli. Ümit Özdağ, another prominent dissident figure dismissed from the party ranks, recently expressed that the new party will be a center party targeting centrist votes inside the AKP as well as the CHP. MHP's Trabzon MP Koray Aydın, a former deputy chairman of the MHP and another dissident member, announced his resignation and admission to Akşener's party. Aydın, one of the most senior figures of the nationalist movement, will be in charge of the formation of the national organization of the newly formed party. Aydın was the sole dissident MHP member who had not been dismissed from the party after the overturned Congress attempt. The distant figures inside the MHP have long complained about Devlet Bahçeli's attempts to concentrate power in his own hands and his alliance with President Erdogan and the AKP for the April 16th constitutional referendum. I have served in every stage of the MHP, starting from its youth branches, but the founding principles of the MHP have been abandoned by the current administration, said Aydın during the ceremony organized by Akşener to welcome him. Aydın also announced that Meral Akşener will be the new party's presidential candidate for the 2019 presidential election.
Now let's have a look at what's on in Istanbul this weekend.
One of the notable festivals in Turkey, the Zeytinli Rock Festival, kicked off on Wednesday in Zeytinli in the Edremit district of the northwestern province of Balıkesir. More than 30,000 people attended the festival during opening day. Şebnem Ferah, Mor ve Ötesi, Athena, Pentagram, 150,000 music lovers last year. Turkey's first edition of Kür Olympics will be held from Friday, the 24th of August through Sunday, the 26th. Taking place in Heybeliada and Kalmış Sports Center, the full program includes a number of sporting events, workshops, and panels.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.